Hey Beer Geeks, today we are going to be talking about whether there is a sense of terroir to your beer.
So to translate that, for me, you, lay people, everyone else, can you taste where your beer is from, Johnny?
Exactly. And spoiler alert, probably not.
So watch along to find out why you can't taste where your beer is from, guys.
But why ingredients and where things come from are still incredibly important.
We've got an absolutely luminary collection of beers here, Johnny. Why have you chosen these 4 beers?
Well, I'm not going to lie, the idea for this video, the entire inspiration and the reason we're shooting it is because Allagash have come to the UK in meaningful quantities for the first time, and that makes us very excited. So we're trying to think of an excuse to talk about 2 Allagash beers at least. Maybe more will come up. There's a fridge full of them here at Beer Merchants.
Yeah.
But what I've done is I've selected 2 beautiful Allagash beers and 2 other beers, and all of these speak to a certain ingredient.
Okay.
So this is water. We'll get into why in a bit. This is all about the hops.
Yep.
This is all about the grains. And then this one combines yeast, but also other adjuncts you might want to put into your beer. And we're going to look at each ingredient as to whether there's a sense of terroir, as well as, and by the end of this I will be able to pronounce terroir correctly, as well as whether all 4 of the ingredients in each of these beers could create a sense of place. Just quickly, perhaps we should explain what terroir is to wine. So it's a French word that's used to describe the factors that go into a wine tasting the way it does beyond the grape variety. So the soil, the vine, the yard's aspect, the climate, and more things. It's a tricky, thorny issue when it comes to wine, and it's even trickier when it's applied to beer. So shall we start with a lager and with some water?
Always, Johnny. Always start with a lager.
Always start with
and
a lager.
Follow up with a bit of water.
Right, so this is Hofbräu, Helles. This is, one of the most important breweries in the world, really. In my upcoming book, The Meaning of Beer, we will talk about, see, I'm already in there.
Nice plug.
About how this beer and this brewery and the people that owned it, who are the Wittelsbachs,
Yep.
saved Bavaria with their brewery from financial ruin.
They did.
So this is a Helles. What do we know about Helles, Bradders?
They're bloody delicious.
Good start.
The Germans do them amazingly well.
Certainly do.
Especially those in Munich.
Exactly.
And they put a lot of their success down to the artisanal wells below Munich.
They certainly do. So yeah, Munich actually has quite hard water. The tap water's quite hard. But if you dig far enough down under Munich, you hit some beautifully soft groundwater. And to brew a Munich Helles, which is, I don't think it has a designation of origin, but it's seen as a particular thing. And it is, in fact, the requirement for you to pour at Oktoberfest is that you make a classic Munich Helles.
So basically, if you're not tapping into those wells, you're not coming in to Oktoberfest.
Which is why we saw at Geisinger Brau when we went over there, they built a well at great expense, 100 and something meters through the ground to get there as they tried to pour Oktoberfest. So this beer has, supposedly, it certainly would have 100 years ago before we really got to grips with water chemistry, has unique, soft water.
I love it.
Should we try it, see if we can taste it? Taste Munich in there?
Can't wait, Johnny. It's pillowy soft.
It is nice and soft, and that's partly the carbonation, it's partly the water chemistry, and it's partly, the final gravity and all this kind of stuff. It does take me back to Munich. Every time I have a Helles, it's so different to a Pilsner. You just you're taken to like the Hofbräu house or to the Augustiner Keller where we went quite recently. It's nostalgic of Munich.
Yeah.
I don't know whether we could say it tastes of Munich, particularly because tap water in Munich tastes nothing like that.
No, it doesn't.
But something that is interesting and where a sense of beer tasting of a place comes in is the fact that all beer styles, certainly historical beer styles, not so much the modern ones we're getting today, are born of the natural ingredients that they had available to them.
Yes.
So before we could affect water chemistry, you had to brew a style of beer that complemented that water chemistry. So that's where we get the most famous example is Gose from Goslar in northern Germany. They had to brew a style of beer in a certain way because their water was salty. And you see that all over the world. If you've got very hard water, like in Burton, that influenced, it didn't just change the flavour of the beers they were already making, it influenced the recipe they chose
to work.
work.
And also, historically, it made some of these places, the terroir of them, I
Yeah.
think we could say at that point, the terroir was there.
Yeah, they probably did.
It made them a massive success.
Yeah.
Like Burton in particular, those beers went all around the world because of that water profile and what it brought to the beers they were making. We could say that almost man has surpassed the need for terroir when it comes to water now.
Yeah.
Because we have such an accomplishment over water chemistry that you can replicate any sort of chemical makeup of any water from around the world, right?
Yeah, so we can do that in a chemical way, but we also have control over fermentation, over all
Yeah.
the other ingredients, and we can transport them, which is what we'll talk about when we dig in to an exceptionally hoppy beer and talk about hops and sense of place. So sommeliers, wine experts, particularly master sommeliers, can taste the wine and they'll be able to tell you the grape varieties, probably the region that they came from, and also even the vintage, like literally the year that it was made, without looking at the bottle. Like incredibly skilled, incredible people. As we're going to discuss, that's very hard to do in beer. But with hops, it's probably the closest we can come to that. Hops are almost our grapes in beer, very varietal-led, very farmer-led, and also vintage-led.
Yeah.
So the reason I picked this beer, we couldn't get our hands on a fresh Pacific Northwest IPA, but what we have got is this beer from Beak. It's Strata, which we tipped to be big in 2024, and they went over, selected these hops, literally down to the farm and down to the field on the farm, for a specific beer, also based on a style that I don't know whether they discovered it over there, but it's a style, an approach to brewing that they really like, which they're calling Bright IPA. So the first question is, could we sniff this beer and go, yes, that is Strata, in the same way that a sommelier might be able to go, this is Riesling, or this is Pinot Noir?
Yeah.
And I'd really hope that's definitely possible. And we've done it on the channel. We've sniffed things and gone, that's Cascade, that's Citra, that's Fuggle, you know. And this one smells like juicy fruit, chewing gum, and marijuana, which is what I would associate with Strata.
Yeah.
Like really, really strongly of that. And I would like to think that if I hadn't known what that hop was, I'd have been able to go, I mean, that's probably Strata or possibly Mosaic. Whether we can go deeper than that is very hard. So obviously they've selected it by lot, by literally the field in that farm. Most of the beers that are brewed in the world are not done that way.
Yeah.
The hops are combined. It might be from farm, it might be from a region. We don't necessarily know the lots. The brewers certainly don't.
So the hops, the terroir, they're only able to grow certain varietals in certain places around the world. But saying that, those particular hops travel all around the world.
Yeah.
To every brewery in every country in the world. Like a wine, you know, you have the vineyards and the estate will be making the wine right there.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, there
Yeah.
are examples where it might be made a couple of miles away of winery, or even there's some urban winemakers in London that get their grapes, I think, from all over the world, but certainly from other parts of England. So grapes do travel a bit, but they don't travel in the same way that hops do, where the majority is sent out.
So like it's almost the opposite in wine, right?
Yeah.
There's not a lot of beer making going on in hop fields these days.
No, there'll be pilot kits and test batches, but
Yeah.
generally when you're testing out new varieties, these farmers send it out to breweries elsewhere. So
Yeah.
that sort of connection to the land is almost entirely lost.
I'm going to throw it back at you, Johnny.
Oh, okay.
Right? We've looked at the comparison to wine. What about if we look at the comparison to coffee beans? Right? Because they travel all around the world.
Yeah, they do.
And you can certainly taste a Madagascan coffee bean from, a Central American coffee bean.
I mean, that's a great question as well, because the other thing that we should know about coffee beans is that they travel and then they're processed.
Yeah.
So is there an element of a sense of place in that it's processed in a certain way in a certain place?
Yeah, okay.
Where that's not generally the case with hops. Hops are processed immediately
Yes.
because they need to be farm fresh.
Yeah, they spoil.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. So they'll be dried and packaged in nitrogen or CO2.
They're
or-
almost like frozen peas in that respect.
Yeah.
That, you can, like, a frozen pea tastes pretty great.
Yeah.
And that's because they've frozen the kind of essence of it there.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think we can really say there's a sense of terroir, but there's definitely a stylistic difference. So we can know when we're having a New Zealand hop or a South African hop or certainly an English hop compared to those ones. Or, I mean, it's getting trickier with some continental styles and some modern hops, but you can create a sense of place. It's just not the sense of place that you're in.
Yeah, and you know what, Johnny? I don't think that's a problem. I think it's great we've kind of conquered nature in that we are able to transport these things in a way where they remain really vital and like great flavors and energy and everything to the hop that remains fresh all the way to you, vacuum packed. The essence is there, and I would argue that the essence is the same as where it came from to where it ends up. So does it matter that it isn't made where it started?
So it's kind of taking away the slightly artsy, indefinable element of terroir and just going, it does smell and taste of a place because it is from that place and it's dominated by that aroma. So it's a sense of place, not a sense of terroir to some extent.
I think so.
Yeah. And that can be just as powerful and important and interesting and delicious.
Yeah.
So now we finally come to Allagash. We can finally taste the beers that one of the breweries that I most miss when I realise I haven't been to the States since, actually I don't want to think about it, 2019.
2019,
yeah. So this is 16 counties, so named because all of the wheat, it's oats, barley and wheat, all come from within the 16 counties around Portland, Maine, where Allagash are. And Allagash are a very sustainably minded company, both in terms of the people and the planet. So this for them is partly a challenge for the brewers, but also trying to support their local area and trying to, I guess, do what's right. I'm not sure how much of an aim there is for them to produce beer that tastes of those 16 counties.
I think for them, so it's all about supporting the local growers, and the more success that they have in Maine, the more success that the farmers have in Maine as well.
Yeah. So it's a sense of community, I guess, is where that's coming from. But can we, we're in the UK, right? We are the home of most of the great malt that's used in brewing and in distilling.
We're pretty good.
Our barley and our wheat is unmatched unless you're making Pilsner. And America's getting great at it. Please don't hate me for it. But we are the home of this. Can we taste a difference? Is there a difference? Should there be a difference in the malt flavour of this? Now, this is a Belgian golden ale, sort of, like a Lef.
Yeah.
So there's going to be big yeast character to it as well. But is there any sense that this is an American brewed or even Maine brewed beer? Fuck, that's delicious.
Very good.
I mean, for a Belgian golden ale at 6.2, 6.5, 6.5, it's light and it's zesty, which might cut, a Belgian would never dream of putting oats and wheat into their golden ale. But I think it gives it kind of a crackery, slightly wheaty, light, zesty, lemon barley feel.
It tastes of fields, doesn't it? And like
it does taste a bit
nature
of fields.
and like really great sort of summer
like
zestiness.
Raw wheat kind of. If you and we have done this, just take an ear of wheat from a field and put it in, and it's quite grainy and not sweet at all,
but kind of delicious.
It's rustic. It's rustic. I wouldn't say it tastes of like a Maine field, but it certainly seems like they've tried to emphasise the malt character of this beer a little bit more and say it's not just going to be like a Lef or a Brugesot or something, which is, typically quite sweet and full-bodied and, a little bit sticky, and you get that combination of like slight stone fruit and phenols and banana and pear and stuff. They've gone, no, actually, the focus of this is going to be that slightly rustic grain character on top of that Belgian thing. So they've tried to push, I think, a very dry, raw wheat kind of character. I wouldn't say it screams Maine. But I don't know if Maine, maybe they all just eat raw wheat in Maine. Maybe it's a delicacy.
I tell you what, we travel all around New England.
We do.
And it's such a stunning part of America that it feels almost like a time warp, like back to an earlier time.
It's the red barns and fields of barley. And
it's kind of like
beautiful.
It's
landscape.
untouched by time a little bit.
Other than the business aspect and supporting your locals, is it important for the drinker to have local ingredients? Is it a new experience?
I think, right, we're all craft beer fans and we're all kind of geeks when it comes to this stuff. So I think it's a sales technique.
Yeah.
So it might be more expensive, but also I think it's more interesting as a prospect, as a drinker. And like I'm like, I'll buy into that. I'll be like, yeah, it's hyper local. You know, I think that's an admirable thing to have done. You know, like they've gone, you know, it's going to cost more, but we've got good stuff here. We don't need to be traveling all over the world necessarily to get whatever we need to get. And it's probably a nightmare to organize. The yields are probably crazy all the time. But there's something where you go, the message is powerful enough that it's more important than the cost.
So you use the term hyper-local.
Yeah.
It's not going to get any more hyper-local than our final beer, which uses local fruits, wild yeasts, and honey from Allagash's own hives.
I'm looking forward to this one, Johnny.
Let's see if that matters. So more Allagash?
Mate, I can't. This is a great video. 2 Allagash in a row.
For us, at the very least. So this is a dark sour ale, Flemish ready kind of vibes. So wild yeasts involved, and then also raspberries and cherries from local orchards. It's called Once Upon an Orchard. It's a whole series of working with fruit growers. But most importantly, I think, honey from Allagash's own hives.
I mean, I don't remember seeing the hives when we were there, but that's
I don't
an
remember seeing that
incredible
either.
little bit of.
I mean, we were there in
location.
extreme cold. The bees would have been, they'd have been chilling
yeah.
out for winter.
That's true.
When we were there.
Oof.
So obviously, you know, we've got fruit involved here.
Wow.
So, you know, just like grapes, there should be a sense of terroir to the fruits. You can smell the oak.
That is not the colour I was expecting.
What's that, dark sour ale?
Yeah, it's very dark, isn't it?
So, ostensibly, we're talking about the yeast here. Can local yeasts add a local flavour? I'm going to say, because we will try to dive into this, I just want to say straight up, lambic does taste different. Sorry, spontaneous beer does taste different all around the world, according to the yeasts that are in the air, but more importantly, the barrels, the original recipes, the hops and the ages of the hops, and obviously, most importantly, the blends that the brewers come up with, right? So, lambic is, and by which I mean the beers from the Pajotton land, are unique, but it is not just the microflora that's doing that. Where inspiration is taken from the lambic regions to other parts of the world, say Jester King in Texas or Burning Sky in Sussex, they're all going to taste different. Even if they use the same microflora, it would be different.
Yes.
So the sense of place in wild ales and lambic style beers has to be also cultural. And I think that's also true of wine, and maybe not talked about by more general wine drinkers as much. We think it's the agricultural element. It's also the cultural element. And I think that still counts. And that's what a lot of beer has as well, this kind of cultural terroir. But let's see. Can we taste Maine again? Wowee. It's got all of that on the nose. Honey, raspberry, rich sour cherry, oakiness, a little bit of brown bready raisininess.
It's fantastic. Yeah, exactly.
Wow. What a magic little beer. Wow. Loads of oak tannin, like really dries your mouth out. Loads of cherry skin tannin as well. Tannins for days. Good Lord, it's like a Rioja.
It's amazing, right?
But lovely tartness, lovely sweetness as well with that, like, I guess probably perceived sweetness. It's not actually sweet. I mean, another thing to talk about, I'll get in trouble for this, is the fact that not many of the fruits that are going into the lambics of the Pajotton land are local.
Yeah.
You know, they have to produce in volumes that mean that's just not possible. A lot of, you know, I think Polish cherries in particular, nothing wrong with Polish cherries, but it doesn't have the sense of place that lambic would like to project. So I think that's very exciting. Like, we're tasting a Maine beer that we know those fruits and those cherries have been grown in that region, and it's very hard to get past the almost placebo effect of that. Whether it tastes of Maine, I just don't think it does. And as we said in the intro, I don't think there is a sense of terroir to beer. There definitely is to the ingredients, but once you combine them all together, it doesn't matter if the bees are literally flying around your barrels. It doesn't mean it tastes of that place.
So, like, I would argue that the intent almost of doing the act of doing all of those things they did, their own honey, the local cherries, the local microflora of, you know, the yeast that are in the air, everything, it all adds up to greater than the sum of its parts, and it makes something special that could only happen there. And I don't know if that's because it's in Maine, New England, and it's, you know, that part of the world, or if it's because the people that have made it, and they, with their minds, Johnny, they've conjured up this magic in a glass. So the terroir is almost coming from the human for me.
Yeah,
The decisions they've made.
Yeah, we talked about that cultural element. I guess there probably is terroir to this beer. I mean, of course it is. If everything's locally made, locally grown, and the yeast is, you know, wild yeast from the local area, it has to have a sense of terroir. Like you say, like it will be. You could take the same recipe, and it would taste different if you made it elsewhere. You could take the same people elsewhere, and what they made would taste different. And you could take that exact beer before it was blended elsewhere to different palates, and it would taste different. So there is uniqueness to this beer. Is uniqueness the same as terroir? Not necessarily, but kind of. I can't believe we've chatted for an hour and we've come up with not necessarily, but kind of.
We've established that, I think, you know, with technology and with our will as individuals, we can assert a kind of terroir and an idea of terroir, a terroir of the mind, Johnny, into a beer. And it's all, you know, it's about the marketing as much as it is about the ingredients and the place. But I think the idea of terroir in beer might be a little bit hokum, but also it's like a really powerful sales technique.
Yeah. It's incredibly complicated, but it's also incredibly important.
Yeah.
Which I think we could also say for, say, the word craft itself as well. Like there's so many things that have to feed into it that it almost becomes meaningless when you try to deconstruct it. And I think that wine can talk about terroir more helpfully because it's a much simpler recipe. It's much more regionally, I guess, distinct.
Yeah. And it's focused on the point of origin as well.
Yeah.
Like the production is in the point of origin.
Yeah. Whereas beer has at least 4 points of origin in the ingredients. And then you've got where it's made, who made it.
But you know what? The grey areas are where the great stuff happens.
Yeah, it's where we have the great conversations.
Yeah.
You know? And we talk about, you know, we switched our thing about independence versus ethical brewing. We were like, independence is a means to an end. And I think that trying to create beer that has a sense of terroir is also a means to an end because it results in, you know, a unique style, a unique beer because no one else will take those exact hops and brew this style of beer. It ends up in a unique approach to business and it ends up in something where just everything about this beer is unique and will, even if they make this exact beer again, won't be the same. So even if there is no terroir in beer, it's a wonderful aspirational thing to aim for.
Beautiful.
You're beautiful.
Ah.